a great point. Thank you. On that note,
Jolie, can you come on down?
the panel begins. Thank you, Jolie and Philip, for helping today.
All right, guys.
Here she
Welcome,
comes.
Jolie.
Oh, she's mine.
Jolie is mic'd. Our runner is mic'd.
Hold on. It's green.
Jolie, thank you so much for being here today to talk about buyer consultations. Well, Jolie, I don't know if you noticed, but there's been a settlement back in August that's kind of changed a few things. Has that affected you?
I feel like I've heard something about that settlement.
Yeah.
Anybody else heard anything about it?
So there's been something that I was always impressed with about you, Jolie, is I think it was like maybe 3 years ago, maybe 4, I once walked past Jolie having a meeting in this little office right here, and she was having a buyer consultation. And I was familiar with buyer consultations, but the way that she was handling it and the questions she was asking, I was really impressed with. And so with these NAR settlement changes and the questions I get from our mentorship group, I was like, I gotta like interview Jolie. So Jolie, I gotta ask you, what is a buyer consultation? Why do you do one?
Yeah, great question. First of all, thank you for having me, and I appreciate everybody being here to listen. A buyer consultation is essentially your interview with them, right? They don't realize maybe oftentimes that they're interviewing you really for the job, and so you can kind of utilize that to turn it around. I do them, to be honest with you, because I always thought we were supposed to. I thought it was a requirement to have a buyer's representation agreement with them from the start. I worked with David, as many of you guys know, for many years, and that's what I was taught, was always to have that conversation with them from the very beginning. And so, I think the power of it is just that there's no surprises coming to them, that you're not afraid to talk about the financial piece up front. But more importantly, I think, is just it's a good time to get to know them and for them to get to know you a little bit better.
So Jolie, this is happening right in front of the listing, right when you meet them. That's the first time you meet them, right? Right before you go inside?
Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's not. I've done it with friends who maybe I was just casually hanging out with, seemed really interested in purchasing a property or listing a property. And just this, when you know someone in a casual setting, I think it really makes a much bigger statement to bring them into your office and show them that you are a professional, that this is your job, and you are the expert on this topic. And so this is really your opportunity to show some value. But I think the most important part about it, obviously you want to start it out by giving them, an overview of who you are and your experience. And, like Kevin, I also do project management for construction. And so, I can bring that to them as well. But really, for me, I feel like it's the best time to let them tell you their story, right? Everybody's different. Very important in real estate is to be extremely versatile and not try to impose the process on them and not try to impose your opinions on them, because it could be completely different than what they want.
I think that's great. So you are asking some really important questions then, right? So I'd imagine you want to know what their motivation is.
Motivation is certainly one of the questions. I like to start it out by just asking them to tell me a little bit about where they're at in the process. And this does two things, right? It tells me if they have a job, if they've been pre-qualified, if they have any money. And also it helps you determine their personality type, right? So if they are a very expressive person that really wants a nice garden and a beautiful kitchen, or if there's someone who's much more analytical and really wants to have a very small manicured lawn with a garage. It really just helps me determine how I'm best going to serve them, right? And I don't really have to do I don't have to ask too many questions. You're more just asking guiding questions, right? I'm not there to tell them, oh, you want this. But what I can do is what I like to call adding value in the moment, right? So I'm not trying to act like I know everything. I don't know everything, but I am the real estate expert in the room, so I most likely know more than they do. but I don't need to flex that. But I can subtly by finding out like where they are in the process. So, for example, if you're working with a first-time home buyer, what are some things that they might need to consider? A class, yes.
Yeah, sometimes, right? So, yeah.
A class, are they in a rental unit? Do they need to give notice? You know, not all of those are the same. Some of them have very strict timelines with, you know, you have to renew on the year every year, and if you don't, then they have the ways that they do it. Some people, you have to give them 30 days notice. Have them find out what that is. They need to plan for that. You have to incorporate that into their timeline. And also, what was another thing? Is this their second home? Do they need to sell the other one? Do they need to sell that home first? You got two deals then right there. And
that changes your conversation, doesn't it?
It changes the conversation, absolutely. Maybe they want to keep that property and use it for an investment property, right? So you help them do that. Maybe you're going to do the property management for them, like MG, and these guys have just started doing. And we also offer that as well in the Hendricks Group. It's just very important, I feel like, to have that well-rounded knowledge. And you don't have to present anyone with a bunch of numbers. They can find that online. I think that the most powerful piece is to let them know that you know what you're talking about and you know what's going on in the deal, and you're going to take care of them.
I think that that's really great, and I think knowing that you can show by listening to, right, knowing like what's important to them, and like you just described something that we could probably go in a class on every single thing. I mean, talking about, hey, they have to sell a house. Okay, well let's go through that scenario, right? Or, you know, I have a rental property, or I'm self-employed. Well, good thing I know all these different lenders, right? That can really help with these situations. I want to jump into the big one, Jolie. When we were in my office kind of talking about this, the big thing is compensation, right? How do we handle the buyer representation agreement, and how do we represent our people properly so we can be a good fiduciary? And while we were talking about that, Jolie, you checked your email and something happened. What happened today?
I was in a multiple offer situation for a buyer.
Represent buyer, okay.
And we got a counter offer where they countered no commission to the buyer's representative.
Oh, so Jolie's not getting paid. That's really sad. Wait, are you going to get paid?
Oh, Jolie's getting paid.
Well, how is Jolie getting paid if it says zero? It just doesn't make sense. It says 0% co-op compensation to the buyer agent. Sounds like you're not getting any money. How does this work?
Well, luckily, I've already had that conversation with the buyer before we saw any properties that our fee is 3%. So I think, and backing up a little bit on that, going into your buyer consultation, I think the most important thing is to be prepared to talk about this, to talk about the entire project. So the entire process. Know what you're going to say before you go in there. And I even, will bring little things to help me along the way if I get a little tripped up or forget where I am or we get off track. It certainly happens. I mean, there's no linear way to have the conversation. But they do sign it. And I'll go through this buyer representation agreement with them right there. And make sure that they read it and let them know that our fee is 3%. I don't know that I've ever had anyone dispute that, certainly not in the moment. If it was preventative of them getting the deal done, we can normally work something out. But that's not how I start the conversation. I start mine at the top, and then we can negotiate down if we need to.
And a reminder, all commissions are negotiable. And you know your worth, act your wage, saying that you are 3%, and they say I don't want to pay 3%, and you say I'm doing 3%. That's still a negotiation. You are still negotiating by saying, okay, I'm 3%. They can walk away, right? Jolie's not finding that because she does such a good job of providing value as to why she's worth 3%, and somebody who is going to now have to pay 3% more at the closing table. They're probably quite happy because they're getting the house that they want, right, Jolie?
Well, they certainly wanted it enough to offer close to full price. But they didn't need to offer full price. And I gave them that consultation as well when we were looking at a property that, after you fix it up, this is what it's worth. So you can't really pay more for it if you're going to be upside down on it in the end. And just really make sure that you're always running the numbers for your clients. And that's why I said, like, in the listing appointment or in a buyer consultation, you don't need to overwhelm them with all these numbers about your sales, and they can see that. They can see I've been in the business for 10 years. Obviously, I've done some real estate deals. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so the numbers will come. There will be a time to go over them, but I do like to give them an idea when we're talking about it of if they have a budget of what 3% looks like, and that they should be prepared to come up with that if it comes to that. And the next thing that I do also is talk to their lender. So John and I worked on a deal recently, and we were in constant conversation of if she wanted to purchase this home, this is the amount that would be due if the seller doesn't agree to pay the full percent. We've already found out what the commission rate is. And so he just calculates that into the payment. And then we determine if she can afford it certainly before we make an offer on it. Oftentimes we want to find out before we even see it, right? And if they can't afford it, then there's really no reason for you to go and see the property.
So wait a minute. You're not just talking to your buyer, you're talking to your buyer's lender and being prepared before sometimes even seeing the property so that they know what that payment looks like?
Absolutely. I don't know why you wouldn't. Most people are on a pretty tight budget. Most people know what they can afford a month. They should be relaying that information, if not to you, at the very minimum, to their lender, because that's who's going to be coming down the pipeline with the numbers at the end, right? And that's how they're going to find out. So we can have a pretty good idea of what a property is going to cost you a month just by, looking at the price, looking at the taxes, getting an insurance estimate, having John run these numbers. If there's a commission balance that's going to be due, it's just incorporated in. We are lucky, I feel like, that this conversation has gotten a lot easier because now that it's not in the news so much, it really is just part of the conversation. I mean, it always has been a part of the conversation. I think the most important part is just to not be afraid to have that difficult conversation, just like you're going to be having lots of other difficult conversations throughout the process of the deal, and that's just your job. And so this is a legal requirement, it's required by law. You can go to real estate jail if you don't do it. And so nobody wants that. So it's just better to be honest with them, not only right in the beginning, but throughout the transaction.
MJ, I wanted to ask you a question. So I've talked with some agents that talk about how, hey, nobody else is really doing this. I feel like we're the only ones that are really pushing this. What kind of liability are we opening ourselves up to by not doing a buyer consultation is one thing, but by not having a buyer representation agreement signed until maybe we write an offer or maybe at the closing table or something like that?
Well, first of all, this is really great for preparing cause, and that is something that certainly comes up in our business. But otherwise, it's just like really when that happens and there's a counteroffer and it says we're not going to pay as a lister or as a seller your compensation, then if you're just starting that conversation, then how are you going to get paid? Where's that money going to come from? You haven't talked to the lender to know where it comes from. So I think a lot of times you're just going to be out of luck. And as far as liability goes, people can just jump from agent to agent. This kind of secures your relationship. Sure, you can cancel it, but this is a really great start to have a conversation. Set up the expectations is really what you're doing, making it very clear where the money's going to come from. If the seller does give us a counteroffer, even though we thought that the compensation was included, maybe we had that conversation up front and they said, yeah, we're going to cover your 3%. But then the numbers didn't work out that way and you get that counteroffer. It's not a surprise. So you're just really setting yourself up for success.
Yeah, absolutely. You should always be prepared to have that conversation, but having the information up front is key. Yeah. You have access to it, so there's really no reason not to.
Are you saying a lot of people in the other companies aren't doing this anymore? They just kind of
I've had conversations with agents that tell me that they will meet their buyer at the property, maybe an online lead, said, hey, I want to go see this property. And I'm not going to, everyone has their own style. Like if I were to do that, I might have them sign something temporarily, do a consult, and wow them with how awesome I am, and then let's go have a consultation.
Yeah.
There's a way to do it, in my opinion, but I'm hearing that there are agents that when the buyer will tell our Keller Williams agent, why are you making me sign this? I've seen 6 properties with 6 different agents, and I've never had to sign one of these things.
Wow.
And,
You're like, what's that agent's name?
and really what's challenging then is you may need to think about it from their perspective. I'm about to go look at a property and somebody I don't know is asking me to sign a legal document. That might be a little weird. And so if we were to actually have a buyer consultation instead where they look at you as a fiduciary, look at you as the same way as an advisor, as opposed to someone that just opens doors, they're going to probably have more of a relationship.
Yeah, I think that that's something that you should be prepared for in your objection handling up front. I didn't really realize there were so many people out there not doing it at this point because, I mean, it's the law, and talk about liability. I think that it's impressive that Jolie's been doing this for so long. I've wanted to incorporate it into our practice because it really does do all the things that we had just talked about. But it was hard when nobody else was doing it because people would be, I mean, you still did it and you did it successfully, so kudos to you. But it should be easy now because we are required to do it. And if other agents aren't doing it, that should be part of our objection handling, just to say, well, I'm running a serious business and this is, what happened in our industry, and here's my value, and this is why we're having you sign this. Even on those leads that are generated where you're going to meet at the property, why not meet them at the corner coffee shop 30 minutes ahead of time so you have time, not just like rushing in the door, but to really just go over your value proposition and set that up. And like you said, you can just say this is just for today, then wow them and have them sign something longer. But yeah, I think you're creating a huge liability by not doing this, and that is not the way we operate here at Keller Williams, so you are absolutely required to do this right now, so do it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Another thing, just tapping on what y'all had said, the meeting at the property, if you've done that over the years, it can be very awkward of meeting someone with an agent standing there and trying to learn about them. Something I've been doing lately is Google Meet. Really easy to set up, 20 minutes online, you're seeing face-to-face, having that initial consultation with, so if it's an out-of-town buyer, you've never met them, it can be awkward meeting them at the front door of the first house you're showing.
Yeah.
And I found Google
They
Meet to
usually
be very
have
easy.
like Zillow leads though, like right? They're calling. That's not like we have.
I've seen it with everything. Yeah.
I think that's a really great point, and actually I put that in like my notes when I was just thinking about what we would talk about today. I mean, part of being prepared for buyer consultation is also being prepared for the phone call or the Google Meet. We've got technology on our side, so there's no reason why you can't have this document ready to put on the present and then just go through it with them right there. I mean, and we've got the technology for it, so there's really no, in my opinion, there's no excuse not to.
Make it to the coffee shop, no big deal. Just jump on that, right?
I mean, look, usually I go ahead and just have them sign the agency agreement at the same time.
Yeah, good point. Just do that together.
Yeah.
It has to go into our command before you start showing houses.
I used to have them sign the inspection one.
The due diligence?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I used to have them sign that
I
one.
would also recommend the due diligence at the same time. because
Yeah.
that helps walk them through.
Which one?
The process, due diligence.
There's a document that talks about what due diligence is, what expectations are, what that means, like what they're responsible for.
Inspections, all that stuff.
We can send that out in the post-meeting resources, but it
Yeah.
is in the buyer DocuSign packet.
Kim, what you got, my man?
I did have a question kind of following on this line, and I'm seeing this a lot. I just wanted to see what everybody else would see. So I'm seeing a lot of people writing into the purchase agreement that the seller will contribute towards the closing costs and prepaids versus the commission language. Is everybody else seeing kind of the same thing? Or are you seeing in your agreement that it says seller will pay X to buyer broker compensation?
I'm seeing the compensation to the buyer brokerage and then in the financial terms below where it says the loan information, that's where I'm seeing seller will contribute this amount towards buyer closing costs, and then you go to the additional terms and it says will pay Lighter and Bloom 3%, 2%, whatever. That's what I'm seeing in purchase
I
agreement.
ran into an interesting situation. I was representing a buyer in Baton Rouge, and the seller was a for sale by owner, and he was like, I'm not paying any more than 1% commission, like right off the bat, on the phone. And so I just wrote in the agreement, seller to pay $15,000 towards closing costs and prepaids. And not only did I get paid, but my client got an extra $3,000 off because of doing it that way, and he had no clue.
I would just probably talk to the title attorney, maybe. Like, I try to run everything by my title attorney and make sure that they're happy.
Yeah,
Clearly, you
I
did
it
that.
ahead.
Yeah.
That was a big concern was, how much can we ask for? And in that particular case, it was 6%. So that worked out okay in our favor. But I was just curious as to what everybody else has been seeing.
Awesome.
I've seen it both ways, but I think more frequently I see it just as people doing the agency compensation. Yeah, that's. I've only seen the closing cost thing a couple of times.
Okay.
I don't think I've seen it too much.
Thank
But
you.
and I think that also they told us, at least I feel like I remember Clayton saying, and maybe you can speak to this, that the preferred way was to reference the commission directly, rather than address it through closing costs.
Yeah, I mean, that's just being upfront. I would also defer to a title attorney on that one and just see if that language really matters. But, I mean, for me, if I'm a seller, I just want to look at the net. So that's why it's hard to agree to a compensation up front. If you need 3% for that and 6% for closing, we're at 9%. So
And I think it's also...
I would prefer to see it all just lumped in. Just give me your bottom line.
And John might be able to answer this better, but I understand that, let's say that you have a conventional loan where it's a 3% limit on what the seller can contribute to closing costs. That 3% limit is not that doesn't take into account the commission
Yeah, that's
towards
the way
the
I
seller.
understand it as
So
well.
I think we want to be really careful if we're saying, we'll contribute 3% towards closing costs and seller prepaids, and let that just be what you put in the text. We'll hold on there, like, that could all just go to their closing costs, and that's not going to include commission, because you can still put another 3% on top of that for your commission, even if the limit is 3% towards closing costs, right, John?
Yeah, I would try to make the distinction between closing costs and prepaids versus settlement costs, because closing costs and prepaids are lender terms in terms of how we calculate things. The settlement cost is to actually settle the transaction, and I think that may be a way to, when you're saying, like, the way
Settlement,
Karen
nice
said,
verbiage.
15,000 is settlement costs. Well, it's not a closing cost for prepaid. This is part of the settlement for the buyer.
I think we need a mic for John, and to bring him up, let me go grab a mic real quick.
Yeah, let's get John back up here. Come on, John.
Put that in your purchase agreement?
I put
3%?
yes,
You put that in your purchase agreement?
every time.
Seller is to pay buyers.
And sometimes there's counters like Jolie got today.
If they're not paying, they'll always counter you on that, which is
I
unfortunate.
mean, you can counter anything. So it does, like, all these things are negotiable. I think, it's semantics. It's just, at the end of the day, if they're going to only pay 3% on the sale, it doesn't really matter if it's for the commission or the closing costs, except for to the buyer. The buyer, that's what matters. To the seller, it doesn't matter. They're going to, 3% is 3%. But we need to make sure that the lender is okay with the way the contract is written so that it can go towards the appropriate place, whether it needs to be towards the closing costs and prepaids or towards the settlement. Like, if you say it's for closing costs, can it go towards settlement compensation, or is that, then you can't?
Yeah, if anything that's not used historically goes back to the seller.
That's right.
On the lending side. My thought was if you distinctly say that it's a settlement cost, like whatever the seller is paying is a settlement cost for the buyer, it kind of makes it more broad. Because as a lender, we're clearly just thinking closing costs, prepaids are lender required stuff. So one of the things that I would give an example on is inspections. On every loan type, with the exception of VA loans, we don't really care for any inspection unless an appraiser requires it for whatever reason. So, but that's a settlement cost in many ways, because if the buyer says, hey, I want this put into my calculations when it's all said and done, even though it's prepaid, potentially, you know, we can have, you know, you can have the seller pay for it. I had a situation in Colorado in which that was done. So that's why I think it can be broad if you just change the wording from closing costs and prepaids to settlement. May help you.
You mean say settlement instead of?
Yeah.
Because it covers everything.
It'll cover everything. And then that may be one way to get around, you know, if you have a seller that is, the way Ken said, I'm only paying 1%. You know?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, and that's part of your communication as a buyer's agent. When you're talking to the listing agent, you want to always find out what's going to motivate the seller. Like, what are they looking for? Is it a quick close or is it the number? Well, this is part of the conversation, too. If they're just hung up on, I am not paying a buyer's commission, then you might just word it the way Ken did, or you might just say 3% towards settlement cost, and you don't have to say buyer's commission if that's a hot buzzard, word for them, because it happens. There's just people who have things stuck in their brain and they're like, I'm not paying that. So you can work around it by just wording things correctly.
Yeah, I mean, as a lender, if we know that the buyer has to pay these fees, we have to include it in our, especially our CD. If we don't know about it in our LE initially, at least on our CD, we have to have that information. Or at least it's good to have that information.
Right.
But, so at that point, it's neither here nor there. If in Ken's situation, he had already negotiated it, we'll apply the excess funds to that because in the end, it is a closing cost. In order to get this to closing, it has to be paid. But I'm just saying, if you're trying to get the seller appeased, if there's any issues with that, maybe just word it as a settlement cost versus, for the whole thing to cover commissions.
Well,
So you're saying settlement is a broader term that can cover more things.
In my opinion, it is, yeah.
Yeah.
Because we're strictly closing cost prepaids. That's been knocked into my brain since I started this
Yeah,
business.
me too. So using the term settlement might even cover a little bit more.
Yes.
Okay.
so we're running a little
something new.
more,
I
but
just want to say
yeah.
one thing to piggyback on everything that's been said here today. With all of this terminology and the way people are writing things, and we know some agents try to write like attorneys when they're not, more than ever, we need to be fully reading all our contracts to make sure we truly understand them before we present them to our buyers or our sellers or whichever way it goes. I think it's more important than ever to read all the terminology.
And just to piggyback off that, that's like when you don't get it, then that's what you call me and Clayton for. And a lot of times we're going to tell you to call the attorney because, we only know so much and we're not lawyers. So at the end of the day, we'll answer your questions. And if we can't, then we're going to tell you who's your title attorney that you're working with and call them because they got the legal knowledge and the law degree that we don't have.
Yeah, a lot of times we refer to the title company for a lot of stuff, and then if we don't know and the title company doesn't know, we have a compliance department that answers these questions. So there are resources all the way through.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, Jean, how can we learn? Well, Jolie, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe.
And
really
I know
appreciate your time, Jolie.
I know we talk about this a lot, but there's all these questions. I think MJ stayed after 30 minutes last week because all of these new questions are, now that we're applying it, new questions are coming up. So we will keep supporting you in that way and talking about it. And if you loved what you heard today, we do have this mastermind that Philip has been putting on. This will be iteration 2, and so I don't know if you want to plug that really quickly.
We'll be talking about the buyer rep agreement, talking about buyer consultation. I think this iteration will be about buyer consultation, what to do, why it's important, and masterminding how to solve problems. A lot of the things that we talked about today.
And you filled the room last month. So
Yeah, we had we ran out of chairs last time, so this was really well attended.
Yeah, awesome stuff. Thank you.
That is so important right now.
Yeah, it's really important, and clearly there are questions. So
Especially since
make
we're
time
hearing
for that.
other brokerages aren't
Or bailing
pushing
on it.
the law like they should.
Yeah, we will be the best. We are the best.
We are the best.
And that brings us to Holly's hints. Do you have any hints?
You already got my hints. Read carefully everything. Make sure everything is documented, and make sure you have all signatures that are required. Please. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly.
And with that, yeah, all of these are on events.kwneworleans.com. Check it out. We have some good guests coming up. And Tina and Aaron are on Broker Tour today. Check it out. It's an honor to be in business with all of you. Have a wonderful day.
Y'all are awesome. Thank you, guys.